Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint a snowy cabin scene. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already so that you can paint with me every week. Now let's get started. Today I am starting with a brand new 12 by 16 inch stretched canvas, fresh out of the package, and I'm going to start by creating kind of a gradient in our sky. I'm going to leave lines in between the color changes that I do. So this is going to be a very simple background. And I'm going to use my 1-inch flat brush. I'm going to wet it in my jar and then just wipe it on the edge like that. Now decide where you want the lightest part of your sky to be, and it can be anywhere you like. For my composition, I kind of wanted it to be lighter up in this area and then move darker toward this direction. So I'm going to start by loading up with my white. Remember, we just pull some out and kind of squish the brush to suck the paint up into the bristles. I'm going to come over and just at the corner of my brush, I'm just going to pull out a tiny bit of blue, the phthalo blue, and a tiny bit of the phthalo green. Remember, the phthalos are very, very strong paints, so if you get too much, it's easily going to overpower your white and your sky will get darker than you want it to. I think it's better to start with less than you think you want because you can always get more. I'm just doing those controlled little X's, you know, the kind of lazy X's, just back and forth, just covering that section that I want that color. Just take it out a little farther than you actually want it to go so you have room to overlap with the next color. And I know you can't see that real well. The color is just very, very faint. It's almost just white. I just want to take that down a little bit lower. Okay, now I'm going to load up with more white. And I'm going to pick up more of my green and blue, just a little bit more, still not a ton. I think I got a little more blue on it than I wanted, so we'll see how that goes. I'm going to start just outside of where I left off that last color. And still just the lazy X's, kind of flipping it into that first section. I want to be able to see the brush marks there. To me, this background, I was kind of going for a look that there's something distant, you know, whether it's storm clouds moving in or maybe kind of a frosty winter forest, something. And so that's why I'm letting those brush ends be there. Just take that out a little bit farther so I can overlap the next color. Again, more white and more green than last time. It's still not a ton of paint, and more blue. And if I come back and I haven't picked up enough, I can pick up some more. I'm just flipping those ends into that previous section. I am kind of breaking it up because I don't want to end up with just like a ring. I want it to be a little bit scattered. So if I start noticing a bit of a pattern, maybe I'll take this part in a little farther. And maybe I'll take this part out and up a little bit farther. Just looking for some variation. And let's go darker still. Noticeably more green paint. Noticeably more blue paint this time. In fact, I think I'm going to go just a little bit more than that even. My brush strokes are a little bit kind of solid there, looks like steps, so I'm just going to kind of flick and break that up a bit. I do want a bit more of that color there. There we go. That's about what I was looking for. Take some of it up quite far and some of it down lower. Now I'm just getting the blue and green. I still have lots of white on here, but I'm picking up quite a bit more blue and green just to fill in this corner here. I'm just going to take what's left on my brush and go flat and just fill in the bottom section here. Don't take it up any higher than you know you want your snow to be in the foreground. I'm even bringing it down just a little bit lower so I have lots of room to work with. This is just going to be the underpainting for the snow. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and build some darker trees that are a little bit closer to us than this background, but still quite distant. So we'll have almost no detail or definition. Now I'm going to use my 5/8" angle brush, and I wet this in my jar. I've got some burnt umber here, and I'm going to grab some of my green, a good amount, and some of my blue, and I'm going to bring it over and mix it with the brown. The phthalos mixed with burnt umber create this absolutely gorgeous dark color that is such a rich, rich color. It's not quite black. All right, so I've got some of that, quite a bit, loaded up on my brush, and right here in the corner, I'm going to do a very similar brush stroke. So see, just kind of back and forth, let those ends be nice and soft, and it's okay if this first color isn't dry all the way. Mine's not, so I am picking up a little bit of it. I'm getting a bit of a blend, and that is perfectly fine. Try to keep this looking kind of irregular. You don't want to have, you know, just kind of a big dark puff right here. Kind of break it up, shoot the ends off into different directions. I'm going to bring that down low enough that I can cover the bottom of it with the snow hill that I'm going to do. And I think I'll take a bit of this out so that when we put our cabin on, or our little house, that this kind of disappears behind it. That's also going to help it seem quite distant when it goes behind our little cabin. Let's get a little bit more, and I'm just going to kind of darken right in here so it's just a bit darker. Same brush, same dark color, and now I'm going to just use about the quarter front tip of my angle brush. Very light pressure. I'm just going to kind of scrape through here to almost indicate that there's some little distant trees and little pokey uppy bits in there. Grasses, branches, twigs, whatever. Don't spend too much time working on this because a lot of it's going to be covered up by our pine trees, but I just want to give an indication of something back there so that whatever isn't covered up by the pine trees just appears to have a tiny bit more life to it. And if you're not comfortable doing this with the angle brush, that's perfectly fine. Use something else that you are comfortable with. I cleaned off my brush. I'm just going to smooth out the bottom here. I'm not trying to blend the paint. I'm just making sure, because I have like a blob right there, and I just don't want that to show through my snow. So all I'm doing is just smoothing out anything that's a little bit bumpy. Okay, I'm going to let this dry for a little while, and when we come back, we're going to take a piece of chalk and just kind of sketch out where we want all of the foreground elements. Okay, now I've got a piece of chalk, and we're just going to sketch in the basic shapes of where we want our elements. So I'm going to have a hill over here, right about here. And remember, this is just chalk, so if you decide to change your mind later and place your elements in a different area, it will just clean right off, so don't worry about that. And then I'm going to take that hill right about to there. And from there, because that's right about where my cabin is going to sit, I'm going to bring a little bit of a river that's kind of flowing over toward our cabin. And bring it this way and around, and the shape of my river, the width, everything, the placement even, will probably change as we go. And I'm going to have a bit of a hill here. It comes up into there, and I'll have a tree on top of it. I want to make sure it doesn't look like my river's going uphill. So rather than having my river go up like that, I'm going to have it bend back so it disappears behind the hill. And then I'm just going to generally sketch in my cabin so that I know where it's placed. So we'll have one corner right about there. Now let's bring that in just a little bit more. So right about there. And I want the center of it, we'll say right about here where the hill and the river meet. And then I'll put the other side at an equal distance from the center here, so it's about the width of my chalk on each side. Bring my roof down. And again, the shape of my cabin will probably change a little as I start to paint it in. I'm just getting the idea of where it is. I'm gonna bring this piece of roof down at a little bit of an angle. It's not, you know, slanted off like that. It's just a little bit of an angle. And make sure that the piece at the top is at the same angle. Otherwise your roof will appear to be, you know, kind of weird shaped. Keep this back piece shaped the same as this front piece. And the back of our cabin there. And if you decide you don't like the shape at all, just take a slightly damp brush and just wipe it away. That little haze from the chalk I'm not terribly worried about. I'm going to take out this hill for right now, actually. I think I'll do my cabin again. So my corner, it's my corner, and the other side. I felt like my cabin was too big. I don't want it that big. I want it to seem kind of distant. And then I can bring my hill up so that it kind of cuts off part of the cabin a little bit. And I think that's a good place to start. We can start painting it in now. So I'm going to stick with my 5/8 inch angle brush, and I'm going to load up with some white. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to grab a little bit of each color, just so I don't have a pure white ground. And I can start kind of loosely sketching in my hill. Now remember, this is snow on the ground, so it might not be perfectly straight. So you can use kind of little sketching motions and get little variations in the shape of your hill. And that chalk is probably going to blend into my paint a little bit, but with all the colors that I'm adding that are cool toned, like the purple of that chalk, I'm not terribly worried about it. I'm just going to loosely mix those together. Now keep in mind that the direction of your brush stroke is going to help indicate the way your hill moves. So see, if I pull my brush strokes down like that, that's going to say that it's coming down toward the river like that. If I just fill it in side to side like that, it's going to look kind of flat, and you won't be able to really tell that there's any movement there. I think I'm going to pick up a little bit of matte medium just to help me kind of spread my paint a bit. So right now, all I'm doing, I'm not trying to create my shadows and my highlights. I'm just kind of getting the idea of how the hill is going to move, where it's going to go. Let's do the same thing on the other hill. So just a little bit of green and blue, some white, and a little point of matte medium. Now this one is going to come from here up. See, I'm changing the shape of my hill a little. I didn't go all the way to that purple. All right, I'm gonna go to my number 8 bright because I wanna fill in the river, and I feel like that angle brush is just a little too big. So my river, I wanna make sure that it looks different than the snow. And one of the ways I can do that is through the way I mix the green and the blue. So I know in my snow, I'm gonna have a higher concentration of blue. That's gonna help with the shadows for the snow. So in the water, I think I'm gonna have a slightly higher concentration of green. I'm going to start with my green, just pull a little bit of blue into it. I'm not looking for green water. I'm just looking for it to be a little bit greener than the snow. So I kind of like that color. So I'm going to stick with that. And I'm just going to pick up a little point of white, a little bit of matte medium. And I'm going to keep all my brush strokes in here pretty loose and just pretty much horizontal. Let it overlap your snow a bit. Your snow is ultimately going to overlap your river. So that doesn't matter. What I don't want you to do is get in here tight and try really hard not to touch the snow. If you do that, your river is going to look disconnected from the entire world that it's in. So let it overlap your snow. We're going to cover it up. I'm going to try and keep it pretty smooth, at least for this first layer. And just get it all the way back in there. Now let's add a little bit of variation. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more blue and green, a little bit of matte medium. And what I'm going to do, see how far back I'm holding my brush? That again is going to help me work really loose. I'm going to come in here and start defining the shape just a little bit, just using the tip of the brush and almost kind of scrubbing it back and forth. Very light pressure though, I'm not using scrubbing pressure. Let's get a little bit more. Just to give that frozen river a bit of texture. Because since it's a river, it wouldn't be real flat, you know? It was a moving body of water. So it might have frozen kind of irregularly. Get a little point of white, a little bit of, well, maybe not that much matte medium. Just a little bit of white. And I'm going to do kind of the same thing, just to add some little highlights in there. I think that's a good place to start. We can come back later and add a little bit more definition and texture to it. So let's keep going with our snow. I'm back to my 5/8 inch. I'm just going to pick up some white. And now I'm really going to start defining where I want the highlights in the snow, the brightest parts. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm using pretty light pressure. I've got a good amount of paint on here. And I'm just lightly dragging down. Now a lot of this paint is pretty dry, so it's not really blending, and that's okay. If you get a spot that is kind of dry and it's got that sticky feel to it, and you find that you're kind of pulling paint, then just pick up a tiny little point of matte medium, and that helps kind of smooth everything out. Another thing that matte medium is going to do for us here is make this white more transparent, so we don't have to work for our shadows quite so much. See how I put the white over that, but you can still see the blue? That's because of that little point of matte medium that I picked up. It helps take away the texture of the canvas like that as well, see? Just a little bit of matte medium. See, I'm using kind of short brush strokes. So I'm touching the canvas, I'm almost putting a little bit of pressure so it kind of fattens out, and then flicking it. And that's going to help us get that kind of snowdrift type look. Just remember what direction you want your brush strokes going. Pick up a bit of matte medium. And in some of these areas, I'm taking just the matte medium down so it's like streaking the white and helping me keep that underpainting showing a bit. But if you cover it too much, just grab a little bit more of your shadow color and do the same thing. Notice I'm not using my brush flat, I'm really just using the edge of it here. Go ahead and pull that into the water a bit. What I really want you to do here is remember that this may take a few layers. The way you're going to get your snow to look natural and the shadows in it to look natural is by the way that you layer the light and dark back and forth, and using the matte medium here and there to thin some of it out. You're not going to lay down the layers just the way you want them in one shot. So don't get frustrated. I just picked up a little bit of blue there. I feel like I have too much green. So wherever I'm seeing that green, see, I just kind of threw some of that blue in there with a little bit of matte medium. Now I can go back and get some white and a little bit more matte medium. I'm not picking up a ton of matte medium. And see, that's going to help me kind of blend that out, smooth it in. Got some hard brush stroke lines right there that I want to get rid of. More white. Let's let that side dry for a few minutes and we'll work on this side. So same thing, I'm going to pick up a bit of blue. It's not a ton of blue. Some white and a little bit of matte medium. I'm going to start by kind of defining the shape of my hill. Take that all the way into my river. A little bit of wet blue paint and some more white to streak into it. Now a lot of this right up here is going to get changed or won't show because of the tree that we're going to put there. Same with over here at the top of this hill. That's why I wasn't too overly worried that I have some hard brush stroke lines up there. Ooh, I have a little canvas texture showing that I don't want showing, so I just picked up some matte medium and almost no pressure. My bristles on my brush are not bending at all, just smoothing over that texture. All right, I'm gonna go to my number 8 filbert. And I'm just gonna pick up white, a good amount of white, and I'm gonna really start defining the shape of the snow at the edge of the river. So I'm really kind of just using the tip of the brush. See how heavy that deposits that white paint, and we're gonna use this technique again later on. So I'm just kind of sketching out where I want that snow buildup there. Then I can come back from behind here and lightly just smooth it up. Getting a little of that canvas texture. It's a little point of matte medium. There we go, nice and smooth. Just make sure it follows the shape of your snowbank. Just kind of pop some of those highlights a little bit more. And I'm going to do that all along this side of the river. And this paint that I'm working on right here on this hill, it's pretty dry. So I know it looks like it blended into that blue, but it really didn't. It just kind of layered over top of it. I think that's good. I'm probably going to come back and do a little bit more later right there. I'm just going to kind of finish up back here. I have a couple blank spots because I wasn't sure exactly how far I was going to take it. So I'm just going to make sure this is all filled in. And we'll do the same thing on the other hill. Okay, let's wipe off. I got some blue on my brush. Just pick up my white again, and we'll do a similar thing here. Just kind of packing up that snow right there at the edge. And make sure you smooth it up very, very lightly, very gently into the hill. Okay, at this point, I'm kind of considering this just my second layer. I fully plan on putting at least one more layer on the snow here. So what I want you to do is completely walk away from it. Let this dry, don't look at it, don't mess with it, don't fuss with it. If there's something you don't like on here, absolutely just leave it. Because once it's dry and we come back, you can cover up anything you don't like. So leave it alone, let it dry. We'll be back in about 10-15 minutes. Okay, my snow is dry, And I definitely feel like I want to add some more highlights to it. However, I know once I add my trees, I'm going to add more snow around the base of the trees, so I think I'll just use that as an opportunity to highlight the rest of it. So for now, we're going to get started on our little cabin. And what I'm going to do first is just block in the underpainting. So I'm going to use my 1/2 inch angle brush. I wet this in my jar, and I'm going to take some of my burnt umber, and I'm just going to fill in the shapes. Use the edge of your angle brush to make your lines. So see, I placed that right at the edge of the roof, and I'm just going to drag it straight down. It's a little transparent, but that's okay because I'm going to add a couple of layers to the barn. Just kind of cutting around my snow a bit. Make a straight line here at this edge. Make sure that as you're painting this in, that the sides of your cabin are the same, the angles on your roof. Get that right up to that hill. It doesn't have to be real perfect because, like I said, again, I'm going to add some more highlights to the snow. And so if my brown covers that a little, then I'll just end up covering it later. And I can always take the snow up a little bit higher if I need to. I'm going to get it in pretty close. I do want to leave just a hint of that line so that I can see where the front and the face are, where the front and the side are. But when I add the other layers, I'll end up covering it. So don't sweat that. You want to leave that little tiny peak of chalk line showing there. And I'm going to fill in the roof the same way. And I think it's probably still off a little bit, but again, I'm not worried about it right now because I can make adjustments. Leaving a little hint of that line there. I think it's just a little bit bigger in the back than in the front. But I want to take this up just a little higher than the point of the house anyway, because the roof has some mass to it, so it sits up a little bit higher than the rest of the house. And then I'm just going to indicate the roof down this edge. It's a little wonky and weird, but that's okay. It'll be better once we get all of our layers on there. I think this line pokes in just a little too far. And now we can start on our trees. So I'm sticking with my 5/8 inch brush. You could use a 1/2 inch or a round brush, whatever you're comfortable with here. I'm going to grab some of my green and some of my blue, quite a bit of each, because I'm going to use a lot of this color. Lay it down there and mix it in with my brown. Get that dark color again. So for a minute, these trees are really going to kind of blend in with this darker color, but we're going to add snow to them, so it'll kind of pop it off of there a little bit. Doesn't have to be a real precise color, just mix those three until you get a dark color. And I'm going to smooth my brush to a nice point. Decide where you want the base of your trees and just start from there and drag your brush up to however tall you want them. I'm going to kind of put 2 right in here. If you end up putting your trunk too far down, don't worry about it. We're going to end up covering that with snow anyway. See, I'm going to make this one just a little bit taller than that one, I think. And then I'm going to do a smaller one that the trunk is not going to come down in front of this hill, and that's going to push it back, make it seem like it's behind the hill. And I'll put them right here and just drag it up about to there. So that's going to be a nice short little tree. It's kind of halfway between these distant dark trees and these trees here in the foreground. Now I'm going to use my flat natural bristle brush. And again, I'm using this one. You've seen me use this one for trees before, and I'm using it because the bristles are very stiff and kind of puffed out looking. So what I'm going to do is take this brush. It is dry. I want to use this brush very dry. I'm just going to come into that dark color and just tap into it. I don't want to pick up a big glob of paint, at least not right now, because I'm just going to be doing the top of the trees. So can you see the paint doesn't come up the bristles, it's just right on the end. I'm going to zoom you in there so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to take the corner of the brush. I'm not going to go and just like stab it right onto there. I'm just going to use the corner of the brush, start right at the top, and just make just a little dot like that. Still just using the corner of the brush. And as I come down, I can slowly start widening it out a bit. And as the tree starts to get a little bit wider, I can slowly start turning my brush a little bit flatter. But see, I'm still using very light pressure. I'm not stabbing, I'm not, scrubbing or crushing the brush into it. I'm just very lightly touching, and always a little bit random. Maybe your tree has kind of a bald spot on one side. See, I'm bringing it out just a little bit farther as I go. Let's go ahead and do the top of this other tree while I have you zoomed in here. So again, it's just going to be the corner, just like that. Very small little spots till it starts to widen out, and I can turn my brush kind of flat. If you get too much paint on your brush here, you're going to get a big thick blob rather than these little broken bits. See, I got a little bit too much there. It's a little bit blobbier than I want it to be, but I'm just going to leave it alone because when I put the snow over it later, I can just make sure to cover that with the snow. Now we can take that all the way down. Still just using light pressure, not overworking any spot. If you overwork this, you're going to have like fuzzy bits in your tree, and that's not going to look very fun. As we get down a little lower, you can start picking up a heavier amount of paint if you want to. And here's the scary part that I know is going to make some of you want to keep touching the paint, and overworking it, but I encourage you to not do that. We're going to take that right down over the snow, and yes, this color is a bit on the transparent side, so it's lighter right there. Don't worry about that. Let it look just like that. Don't try to put a thick gob of paint on it to hide the fact that it's lighter there. We're going to cover that part. And see, my trees are kind of overlapping. You can't really tell where they meet right there. Now let's go ahead and do this little tree. Now remember, I don't want this little tree to be on this side of the hill. I want it to seem behind the hill. So I'm going to be really careful when I get down here to not take this over the hill. But if I do accidentally get it over the hill, it's okay because I haven't added my final layer of snow. So again, just a tiny little point, and these points that I put on this tree are going to be even more delicate. Less paint. He's not going to be as big, and all of that is going to help it seem much more distant. I'm going to get as close as I can there. And if I have any little blank spots where it didn't get all the way down, I can fake it when I put the snow on it later. And our final tree over here, you can make it bigger. You could add more than one tree if you like. I'm just going to do the one, and I am going to start down into my hill about 1 inch and bring it straight up off of the top. Now, another thing I forgot to mention is don't worry about what this trunk looks like. You're not going to see it when we're done. It's really just there so that you know where to place all of your little pine branches. Back to my natural bristle brush. Now, one thing I want to be careful of, because I took it up off of the edge, is I don't want to start it with that teeny tiny little point, because then he's going to look smashed into here. So I'm going to start at the top here, just a little bit wider and right at the very top of the canvas. And that helps indicate that it extends beyond what we can see. But I'm going to do it the exact same way, and you can see a little bit better here now because of the light color on the background. All right, I'm gonna let my trees dry for the most part before we continue with them. In the meantime, I'm gonna go back to my 1/2 inch angle and just shape up my house just a little bit more. I feel like I need to bring this up a little higher on the inside. On this one side so that I can bring the roof up just a tiny bit more. And bring this part backwards just a little bit more. And any other weirdness I can cover with snow. And it's just an old cabin in the woods, so maybe it's seen better days. Okay, I feel like our trees are dry enough. There's still some spots that are a little bit wet, but I'm not worried about that because when I put the snow on it, it might pick up a tiny bit of that and help indicate some shadows in the snow. But if your paint is still quite wet, you might want to let it dry for just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my number 8 filbert, and I dried it off on a paper towel pretty good. I don't want it to be terribly wet for this part. And I'm going to come in and just grab a little bit of white on each side of my brush. See, I don't have a ton of paint. Now, I really want to focus on what we're doing here because we had a conversation during the Halloween marathon about creating worms. And a lot of times when people are doing snow, they create little things that look like worms and they don't like that. So I'm going to show you a way that you can add snow to your tree without creating worms. So I'm going to take the tip of my brush and I'm going to start right up at the top and just very lightly, I'm just going to touch. See, it's just a tiny touch. I'm going to do that here and here and just start working my way down. It's just a tap. Now some of these are going to come out the sides. Some of them are going to come kind of towards us and down a little bit because your tree doesn't just have branches growing out the sides. It's 360 degrees. There's some pointing straight that way, some kind of pointing this way, some right at you. And so we're going to help give that illusion. And it'll be easier to see what I mean when we get down into the bigger parts of the trees. But for now, let's just kind of go and just tap in some snow here and there. See how I put that right over the center, not just here on the edges. See right here, and I'm going to bring that down just a little. That indicates a branch that's kind of pointing toward us. And I'm really just letting the shape of the brush do the work. Make sure you're also not creating polka dots. So if you have, let's say you've got something like that on your tree and that looks very mechanical and very, placed. So you can just take and put a little dot right in between two, connect them. Pull one down a little bit farther. Now as we're starting to get into the bigger areas, we can start doing kind of multiple taps. So like I'll do one there and I'll kind of tap and bring it down that way. Let's go ahead and do this one while I've got you zoomed in here. And if you get any spots that you really feel like is just way too much, please don't mess with it while it's wet. You're just going to smear it and spread it out more and make it worse. Let it dry. You can come back and add the dark color over top of it later. So see, we've achieved some pretty natural looking snow just by touching the filbert to the tree. Now this is not fast. This is going to take a little bit of time to do all of these trees. So I am going to put you into some pretty good time lapse while I work on this. If I think of anything that I have to tell you, then I'll stop and talk to you for a minute. See how in here I've got some pieces that kind of come from the center and down just a little bit? And I'm starting to move into some areas where my paint is wet, so you might see a little bit of that color kind of picking up and giving me some little shadow areas. And if not, that's okay too. Yep, we got a little bit right there. And if you really like that and you're not getting any of that, then just pick up the tiniest hint of your color and use that with the white. I'm not really worried about whether it happens or not. Right here at the base of the tree, I'm not going to worry about taking this all the way down. I'm going to cover that with snow. So anything I'm not positive is going to be covered with snow, I'm going to go ahead and do my little snow bits. But other than that, this ugly stuff here, I'm just going to leave. And on our small tree, now remember this small tree, we want to keep it very distant. And so I'm not going to make the blobs of snow quite as big. And if you need to move to a smaller brush, that is perfectly fine. And just very gently, just kind of dashing a bit of white onto here. Just barely letting my brush touch. Take that all the way down to the bottom. We'll cover up any little bits that might not have gotten all the way there. And we'll do the same thing on our large tree over here. So I'm still using my filbert and just white. And I'm going to come up here and just kind of start piling up some snow at the base of this tree and lightly drag it down. And you can take it up quite high if you want to. A little bit of matte medium, and we'll smooth that out. And now we can start working on adding some of those highlights back into the snowbank. So I picked up just a little bit of white and matte medium. And I'm using super light pressure to just kind of drag down some interesting areas. And this is a little bit transparent up here, but I'm not worried about that right now. Use the edge of my brush to lay down a good amount. And let's brighten up the hill up here, because I don't feel like we'd have too much of a shadow up on the top of the hill. But down, I feel like this would all be in shadow right through here. So we'll keep the top pretty bright and white. So I'm just laying down a heavy amount of paint and then just lightly smoothing it down. Little matte medium if I need the help. I'm not using any blue or green right now, it's just the white and the matte medium. I almost feel like I have too sheer of a cliff looking edge here, and that's because everything kind of moves straight down. So what I'm going to do is come from here and bring it out a little. See how that brush stroke is going that way? And then smooth it down. So you can change the direction of your hill simply by the direction that you apply the paint. So now I have a bit more of like a little hill poking out there. I'm just almost dry brushing now, just getting a bit more white in here and there. And then we'll go do the banks of the river again. See, I felt like that area was way too blue, but I just let it dry, left it alone, and then I can touch it up. Let's go ahead and do this hill before we do the banks. And again, I'm going to start up here in the tree and just cover the bottom of it. This hill, I almost feel like is pretty much the way I want it. I'm really just kind of popping some highlights. And covering the ugly base of that tree. That's really just some matte medium that I picked up on my brush, which is just helping me thin down and spread a little bit of white over some of that area that I felt like was too dark. Okay, let's work on our river here real quick. Now the first thing I want to do before I really pop the white on the snow here is I want to give a little hint of a shadow on the ice, particularly on this side, because we can't really see under the ice on this side or under the edge of the snow on this side. So I'm going to get just a hint of my green and just a hint of my blue. Get that blue-green color again. And some matte medium, just mix it in there. I'm going to come to the edge here. Whoa, try not to put my hand in wet paint. And just kind of sketch some of this darker color around the edge, very loosely. And it doesn't have to go under all of the edges. So like this little piece, for example, I can't see the back side of it, so I'm not going to put any of this color there. But I'm going to put some right there. Make sure I don't have a hard line on the ice. I know that looks really strange right now, but it won't look strange in just a minute. All right, now I'm going to go back into my white. And we'll give some nice bright spots here. I'm mostly just kind of touching, kind of like I did on the trees. Just right at the edge. So you're just kind of scratching it in. I'm not using any matte medium or anything. Just gently scratch it back there so we don't have to keep, smoothing up the hill. And it doesn't have to be on the entire bank of the river. You can skip parts. I'm just putting it wherever I feel like I'd like to see a little bit more of an accumulation of snow. And I think that's about right. Let's do just a little bit over here. And then I kind of feel like I lost a little bit more of the shadow here than I wanted. I wanted this side to be noticeably darker than this side, to say that this side is taking a bit more direct sunlight than this side is. So I cleaned off my brush. I'm just going to get a hint of blue and a hint of green. I'm going to keep it on the bluer side. A little poke of white, mix them in there, maybe a little more than that. And some matte medium. Make it nice and thin. I'm just going to come in here, particularly down lower, and kind of dust some of this back in. So I'm using very light pressure, sweeping in the direction that everything is going. A little matte medium, I don't want that hard line in there. There we go. Now I'm going to get some white. I just wiped my brush off, I didn't clean it off. And some matte medium. Just over the edges of that color. And if something doesn't look bright enough to you, which I know sounds weird, being that it's all white, but it is possible that something could look just not bright enough, even though it's pure white. And the reason for that is you don't have enough contrast. There's not enough dark around it. So I'm kind of feeling that at the bottom of this hill, which is why I'm adding in a bit more of my blue and green. But I have that a bit at the bottom of the trees here too. And so we're going to take care of that. Oh, there we go. I think that's about what I was looking for. So I just went quite a bit more blue, a little bit of matte medium. Let's go ahead and add just a bit of that up into here too. And so by adding a little bit of shadow in there, that makes the brighter parts appear brighter. You gotta have the contrast to really give you the look that you're going for. I know this is just looking absolutely messy, and you're wondering, will she be able to pull this off? And the answer is yes, she will. I took my 1/2 inch angle. I'm loading up with just a bit of white. And I'm just really going to get rid of these hard brush stroke lines and kind of smooth some areas out. I'm using super light pressure, see that? No matte medium here just yet. I'll use some in a minute. Just by spreading this white nice and thin, I retain some of that blue, but I also cover up, like see that hard brush stroke mark? I can just tap it with the edge of my angle brush, and that gets rid of it. Now I'm going to pick up a bit of matte medium on my white. I think that's pretty good for now. I'm gonna leave it and I'll come check on it later once I've got the whole thing done so that I can see it kind of in the big picture. In the meantime, I'm gonna finish up my water here. I'm gonna go back to my number 8 bright. Little tiny point of green, little tiny point of blue, a little bit of matte medium. And I'm just gonna kind of squidge just a bit of this darker color in here and there. Taking care to keep all my brush strokes pretty much horizontal. I just want to get a few darker areas in there. And just wipe that off. Get a little point of white. And same thing, I'm just going to get some little, just a few little lighter spots in there. And it's mixing with that darker color that I just put down, which is good, but you want to take care that you don't overwork it and just end up with a solid color that's all light. You know, after standing back and looking at my snow and giving it a few minutes, I think I'm happy with the snow. I think I'm gonna leave it the way it is. So we're gonna finish up our house. And I still feel like I wanna work on this roof a little bit. So I'm using my number 8 bright, a little bit more brown. I'm just gonna pull the top edge up a little bit higher. All right, now I cleaned off my brush. I have some Cadmium Red Deep. You can use any red you like. And I'm using the basics, well, I'm using the basics on all of this, but in particular, I wanted to use the Cadmium Red Basics here rather than the heavy body because it's quite transparent and I want that brown to show a little bit. The Cadmium Red in the heavy body is going to be much more opaque and I feel like I'd lose a little more of that than I wanted. So I just pulled out a little ball on one end of my brush and I'm just going to touch into my matte medium a little bit. So what that's going to do is help this paint streak. So it'll look a little bit like boards. So I'm going to come up to where the edge of my roof is and drag straight down from there. I'm just going to do that once and leave it alone. I'm not going to go back over that same board. So this is really similar to what we did in the haunted house painting. Except we're not going to go over it so many times. So again, there, and drag it straight down. And see, I get areas where the red is heavier and areas where the red is lighter and the wood shows through a little bit more, or the brown does. So it'll look like old red paint. I'm not worrying about taking it all the way down to the edge of the snow. Not just yet. Just taking it down as far as I can comfortably. And on the other side, tilt my brush the other way. Notice I'm not going right up to the edge of my roof because that's a little piece of the roof that hangs over. Now I'm just going to pick up matte medium. There's still a tiny bit of red on my brush, and I'm going to come from the snow and just up a little bit. Same thing on the other side of the house. Cleaned off my brush, I'm going to get some of my blue-green mixture and a little bit of white. So I didn't really mix them, I just kind of picked them all up on my brush. And I'm going to do the same thing I did there, except on the roof. So I'm going to start at the top edge and drag it down in the same direction as the outer edges. And this, we don't have to try and make it look like boards, so you can overlap, you can work it over and blend them a little bit more if you like. I probably am going to, I'm just going to get this first layer on, because I don't really want blue and green stripes up here. Pick up a bit more white. And let's add just a little bit of snow to the top. So it's quite thick, and then I'm streaking it down. And see, when I said that if your house is a little wonky, when we add the snow, it will kind of cover that. That's what I mean. Kind of have a heavy accumulation of snow right up here. A little bit of matte medium just to smooth that out. I'm just kind of going back and forth between my blue-green and my white, just until I like what I have. I'm going to take that same blue-green down this edge here. And let's add a little bit of snow right on the very edge of the eaves. So I just place a little ball of snow there, a little ball of white, and just very lightly drag it up. I'm going to do that in a couple places. I'm not going to do it all the way around the edge because I think that'll look a little bit phony, just in a couple of places. My white paint is drying out. I get a lot of questions from you guys about how do I make my paint stay wet as long as you do on your palette? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, my paint doesn't stay real wet on my palette. I end up with dried up paint too. And second of all, I don't put out all of the paint that I'm gonna need. I get more paint as I go. So I'll start with a little bit of paint and then add more as I use it up or as it dries out. Just kind of refining the shape here. Taking little bright spots wherever I feel like they're needed. Barely touching the canvas, mostly just the paint that's touching. Okay, the red on here is getting pretty dry. It's starting to dry. So I'm gonna take some Naphthol Crimson, and this part's completely optional. You don't have to use Naphthol if you don't want to. And I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm not gonna cover all of the red. I'm just gonna add a few spots, we'll point to matte medium, just a few spots of some highlights. The Naphthol I really like using to highlight cadmium red because it's not so different that it's hugely noticeable, but it's a really nice kind of a pop version of the color. So I'm just going very lightly with a little bit of matte medium in just a few spots. and over here. But notice I'm not taking it up under the eaves anywhere, just mostly on the part of the house that might be catching the most light. Now let's add some shadows. There'd be some shadows under those eaves. So I'm going to take the same dark color that we used to make the trees, but very little of it. I don't have a lot of it on my brush. And I'm going to come from right under the eaves and just lightly streak down. If it's too dark or too heavy, just grab a little point of matte medium. And that kind of helps to smooth it out a bit. And I have little bits of that brown still showing through, and that's okay. If you've got a gap where your boards didn't meet, remember where I told you to leave that little line? You can just take this darker color, just kind of right into there. Just going to touch up the snow right here a bit more. There we go. Using that same dark color, the blue-green-brown mixture, we're going to make just a few very simple windows, wherever you want them. I think I'm going to place the front door first. So I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to let the shape of my brush create the door. And I'm just going to drag that down, stop at the snow, and I can kind of carve around the snow a bit. And we'll do a window. Maybe there's a little window up here. And maybe there's a little window over here. And we can add a little chimney somewhere. So I'm going to start inside of the roof and just kind of pull it over to the side, using that same dark color. My snow was a little wet, so it kind of blended in there, but that's okay. I can let it dry and come back and do another layer on it. In the meantime, let's not make the front door look like an empty hole. So I'm going to grab a little poke of white, a little bit of brown, and I'm just going to add a bit of a color in there so it looks like there's a door there. Just kind of dry brushing it on. Let's add a tiny bit of snow onto the windowsills. So my brush is clean, I'm just picking up a little bit of white on the edge. And right here at the bottom, I'm just gonna kind of touch there. And I've decided I want to add some small little shrubs around the edge of the house. So I'm going back to my filbert and my dark color. And I'm just going to lightly tap these in. So we'll say there's one right here. And it's behind the hill. So I'm going to stop it right at the hill. And maybe there's another one right here. See, so if your house is wonky, which I felt pretty good about the shape of my house by the time we got to this point, but if your house is wonky, you can do these fun little things or add extra snow on the roof. And all of it kind of helps to hide things. Let's do just a little bit of snow on those little bushes. And while we're at it, let's add some icicles, I think. So I'm going to come from the edge of the roof, very light pressure, and just kind of start dragging down a little bit. These don't have to be real defined. This house is at a distance to us, so just a little bit of a dry brush there, particularly where we have those bits of snow on the edge. Just that little bit of a dry brush is going to help indicate that there might be some icicles hanging down. And I want to amp that snow up some more, man. I keep thinking I'm happy with the roof, and then I'm like, oh no, doesn't have enough snow or has too much something. One last thing, we're done. I'm gonna take my number 4 cloud brush and just get a teeny point of white paint. See, not a lot, just a little bit. And a teeny point of matte medium, just kind of tap them together there. And I'm gonna make just a little bit of some smoke coming up out of our chimney. Just kind of scrub it and get it off into a little bit of a direction. If you use too much paint here, you're gonna have a hard time and have some smoke that just won't stop. I'm just giving really the indication of some smoke. It's not terribly obvious smoke. And then I'm going to sign it. And there's your snowy cabin scene. Make sure you check out the video description below for links to where you can find me all over the internet so that you can share your painting with me and the rest of our community. Mr. Moon and I would also like to remind you to subscribe so that you can paint with us every single week. Isn't that right? He never talks when I want him to. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.